Dan Bongino blasting James Comey over the 8647 Instagram post brought shame to the FBI again. This got picked up, of course, by the New York Post, and that's what you're looking at. But the actual tweet he put out was, former FBI Director James Comey brought shame to the FBI badge yet again this past week. The director and I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to clean up the messes left behind by the former director Comey, and his latest actions are no exception. No exception, because the seashells, which you've seen, are clearly, we know what they are because, we're not little kids. We were not born yesterday, even though he wants to try and pass it off as some kind of, I didn't know. I posted earlier a picture of some seashells. I thought they were just shells, right? Whatever. When I was taking a walk on the beach, I didn't realize some folks associated those numbers with violence. It never occurred to me, but I oppose violence of any kind, so I took it down. You moron.
I knew exactly what that meant. A child knows what that meant. If you're the FBI director and you don't know what that meant assassination. And it says it loud and clear. Now, he wasn't very competent, but he was competent enough to know what that meant. And he did it for a reason, and he was hit so hard. Because people like me, and they like what's happening with our country. Our country has become respected again, and all this. And he's calling for the assassination of the president.
Obviously, he apologized and said he doesn't.
Well, he
wasn't
apologized
calling for violence. But
look, he's a very bad.
What do you want to see happen?
What
do you want to see happen?
I don't want to take a position on it because that's going to be up to Pam and all of the great people. But I will say this: I think it's a terrible thing. And when you add his history to that, if he had a clean history, he doesn't. He's a dirty cop. He's a dirty cop. And if he had a clean history, I could understand if there was a leniency, but I'm going to let them make that decision.
Dirty cop, according to the President of the United States. And you know what? A dirty cop, according to Patel and Dan Bongino. And I think Tulsi, who, by the way, got tarred and feathered by the same crew of people trying to suggest that she's somehow a Russian spy. This is a woman who's a veteran. I mean, just because she dared to go up against Hillary Clinton and it looked like she might actually have a shot against Hillary Clinton, so they had to go after her. She's got no use for any of them either. She wants to see Comey in jail.
Tulsi Gabbard's the director of national intelligence. Are you buying that the former FBI director didn't know what 86 Trump meant?
Absolutely not, Jesse. That is a ridiculous and insane statement to make, certainly within this context, but especially coming from a guy who's the former director of the FBI, a guy who spent most of his career prosecuting mobsters and gangsters, people who know and execute other humans and use this exact lingo of 86. Comey himself admitted in his follow-on message that he knew that this was a political statement. Well, the only reason he knew that, Jesse, was because a little over a month ago, a bunch of anti-Trump, anti-Elon Musk protesters were proliferating the use of this 8647 slogan, which was a veiled call to action to murder the sitting president of the United States. So for Comey to think that we, the American people, are so stupid as to think that he, as a former FBI director, former prosecutor, and someone who clearly pays attention to what's going on, would believe his lie that he didn't know what this actually was calling for. The dangerousness of this, Jesse, cannot be underestimated.
Does he think we're stupid? I mean, I wonder. That's a question that should come up in the questioning with Secret Service. Again, this is James Comey being escorted out of his home because he needs to go and actually be debriefed on all of this. I expect that we're going to learn a whole lot more in the coming days as we need to. Look, Comey has landed himself in a whole bunch of trouble. Not just because of this social media post, but as we're about to learn, because of the scandal that came around the Russian so-called dossier, the dossier that somehow enabled them to bypass any kind of normalcy and laws and get a FISA warrant. Remember how Comey managed to do that one and then leaked it to the press? James Comey led this whole operation, on top of which he was leading an operation, according to George Papadopoulos, whom we had on the show, with a whole bunch of honeypot schemes. Yeah, so that they could try and get information on various Republican campaigns, including Ben Carson's and, of course, Donald Trump's. This is all the brainchild of one James Comey, who then has the audacity to come out and send stupid things like this out into the atmosphere at a time when I suspect he's kind of jealous because Donald Trump is overseas getting deal after deal after deal done. The market's on a tear, and somehow he's going to try and disintegrate it all with this. I mean, you don't do this. He's overseas, for goodness sakes. There's a certain amount of vulnerability when you have a president of the United States overseas, and yet Comey chooses that. I mean, really bad taste, really disgusting taste, but perhaps something more, which is what leads us to what Dan Bongino and Patel were saying. Do not forget, these are two people that were all over the Russiagate issue. Kash led it. Right? For the House, he was leading that investigation, while Dan Bongino, much like myself, was reporting on it every single solitary day, saying, what the heck is going on? I'll tell you, I read that dossier, and I'm like, how would anybody ever think that this was a piece of government paper, intel document? I mean, this reads like it's straight out of the National Enquirer. This reads to me like opposition research. And this is what our intel department should have known, but they didn't want to know that. They didn't want to believe that. They actually wanted to believe that this was serious stuff and that Donald Trump was somehow a threat and bought and paid for by the Russians, which led us down that wild goose chase, spending years and taxpayer money and doing a lot of damage to the Trump reputation in the meantime. So now you've got Dan Bongino and Patel together, dynamic duo at the FBI that are coming out ready, willing, and able to expose all of the lies. In fact, they've been going through all of the documents bit by bit, and they found some stuff. Let's watch what Kash says on this.
Look, I can speak to the folks that were in our seats, our predecessors, and they intentionally failed the American public by putting on the biggest DC deception game we've ever seen. They said the FBI was the most storied institution for law enforcement, and it was. And it will be again very soon. But when the likes of Comey and McCabe and Strzok and company came in here with the James Bakers of the world and intentionally lied to a federal court only to rig a presidential election by lying to the American public and using taxpayer dollars, likely illegally, to fund this entire operation, and then withhold exculpatory information from a federal court that I used to appear before to manhunt terrorists, that's what broke the FBI. And then when they were caught, they lied about it. And you and a few others like Dan and others were brave enough to cover it 6, 7, 8 years ago. And we're still talking about it today because as Congress is working rigorously with us, the Crossfire Hurricane documents are coming fast and hard. And they're being sent there unredacted so we can have full accountability. And that's how you restore what the trust that was lost to the American public when it comes to the FBI.
Guys, I just want to state that this is so important. It is incredibly important. We were lied to. We didn't get the information. And now the Trump administration has declassified everything associated with Crossfire Hurricane. And we're going to find out some stuff. A whole lot of stuff. I mean, we've already found out quite a bit of stuff. I mean, you think about the 51X spooks, including the former deputy director of the CIA. Shame on him, Mike Morrell, trying to print a bunch of lies, did print a bunch of lies. Oh, that laptop. That's not actually anything other than misinformation bought and paid for by the Russians and fed to you by Rudy Giuliani. Remember that one? Or, the Wuhan virus. That couldn't possibly have come from the Wuhan lab where we were actually giving money for gain-of-function research. I mean, the lies were prolific and constant. And this was one of them. And we need to know exactly what happened. To Kash's point, if you want to restore the integrity of the FBI, you need to actually have truth back in the FBI. And again, as my friend Maria said, why would you do it? Why would you risk the entire reputation of the FBI? And the answer is pretty simple. As Dan Bongino said, these guys were weak, and I could go further, but I won't. I'll let him say it.
I don't even understand why. Why did they do that? I mean, why put the FBI and its reputation at risk? What, it was just to win an election? Why?
Because they're weak. Because they're weak. I hate weak people. I can't stand it. They didn't have We're on TV, so I already said BS once. But they didn't have the guts, the courage, or the character to do the right thing. They did the easy thing. Donald Trump became a convenient political football. They thought they could leverage. They thought they thought with the media on their side that they'd get away with it.
And they did. For a while. But you see, Donald Trump's back in office. At one point, he sued Clinton and her cronies because he wanted the discovery. Unfortunately, the lawsuit didn't get to first base, but the goal on that case was to get the discovery because he wanted the information. He wanted to be able to prove out what they were doing, the likes of James Comey and Peter Strzok or Lisa Page, whatever. I get them confused. You know, the star-crossed lovers there. McCabe, the rest of them. And unfortunately, we might run into things with statutes of limitations. I'm telling you, like, just because, you know, we got to be perfectly honest here. I don't know if we're gonna be able to see the proper consequences because of the 5-year statute of limitations. But you know what? At least history will be corrected. The record will be set straight. And we need to have this information for the sanctity of our institutions going forward.
And I'm just telling you right now, as much as we know about Crossfire Hurricane, he and I just found out more last week. And we're continuing to work with Congress to put those documents out. That's how vindictive and vicious the former leadership structure here was. Not only did they bastardize the FISA process and lie to the American public, they withheld and hid documentation and put it in rooms where people weren't supposed to look. And it's a good thing we're here now to clean it up, and you're about to see a wave of transparency.
What do you mean?
Just give us about a week or two.
Do you hear that? A wave of transparency in about a week or two. So they have newfound materials, and we're about to hear this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a big deal. And I know that we don't like having to sit by and wait for a week or two. But they're also saying we want to make sure that we do this right. And we want to make sure the right people are held accountable, even if you can't do it with that darn statute of limitations. At least make sure that we are exposing this to the public, and so you want it all out there.
I was the lead Russiagate investigator for the House Intelligence Committee, and I've been on both your shows in a prior life talking about it. And I'm telling you and the American public that we have now found material and information and people who wanted to hide it from the world since we got in these seats. And we, as the deputy said, we are trying to do it in a fashion where not only are we informing the American public of what happened, but we can have accountability for it.
That's what we need. Okay, we need accountability. We need to know what happened. I don't care that it was that many years ago. I spent a good chunk of my time and career covering that and reading the Mueller report cover to cover and waiting for more out of Durham. And it was like, for goodness sakes, why were there so many stall tactics? What was Comey up to? Really, what was that all about? And then Christopher Wray even. I'm not going to give him a pass either. You got to ask, what were they really trying to do? And you combine it with the fact that Comey's putting his little 8647 thing out there. Tulsi's got no use for it. She wants to see the guy in jail. I think everybody does.
The FBI wanted to send agents into the White House itself to interview a senior official. You would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals, and who would be.
I want to just flag that we're going back to the flashback a couple of years ago. He's being interviewed at the 92nd Street Y by an MSNBC reporter, and he's bragging about how he caught General Flynn. This is sort of similar to how he went after George Papadopoulos, who has been on this show. And, you know, they caught George somehow in a lie because he thought, oh, the FBI wants to talk to me. Of course I'll talk to the FBI, no problem. And they're like, well, where were you on such and such a day? And he's like, who knows where I was on such and such a day? And of course he was naive and didn't have a lawyer there. And thus they got him on these technicalities of lying to the FBI. But if he had had this sort of proper infrastructure around him, that wouldn't happen. You're the FBI, James Comey. Why are you trying to go after everybody and catch them in these little lies by not even offering them, not even saying, hey, you might want an attorney in the room? If you listen to this again, he's proud of the fact that he never, ever, ever had offered an attorney to the likes of one General Flynn. Was just proud that he was able to get him. Because, oh, General Flynn was naive. The whole Trump administration was naive. They were just trying to do the right thing. God forbid.
Would work through the White House counsel, and there'd be discussions and approvals and who would be there. And I thought, it's early enough, let's just send a couple guys over. And so we placed a call to Flynn, said, hey, we're sending a couple guys over. Hope you'll talk to them. He said, sure. Nobody else was there. They interviewed him in a conference room at the White House Situation Room, and he lied to them. And that's what he's now pled guilty to.
What did he think they were coming over there for?
I don't think he knew. No, we didn't tell him. Just said, we got sending over a couple of agents. I want to ask you some questions.
He's kind of a bad guy. He's sort of a bad dude, right? And I think he probably knew a lot of this would be coming out. I kind of wonder if the 8647 was a decoy move, like to distract, because this way, if they go after him for that, he can play the victim card, because you know what's going to come out? All kinds of stuff is going to come out, and we're going to find out just exactly how vindictive he was, and this was exactly what he was afraid of, which is exactly why he was on MSNBC several months before the election saying, you got to vote for Biden, you got to vote for Biden, who at the time may have actually been suffering from prostate cancer. We're going to get to that in just a little bit. But he was out there, singing the song, doing the dance. You got to do this or else.
When you think about a second Trump administration, what do you think the implications would be for the FBI?
Oh, serious, for the Justice Department and the FBI, because Trump is coming for those institutions. He knows their power, and I think he has regrets that he didn't work hard enough to corrupt them last time. So he's coming for them, and that's a danger for all Americans. He's going to put people in positions in those organizations. He didn't have all-stars the last time. He'll have the bottom of the barrel this time, but people who will want to do his will, and that should worry every American. This election matters. Because of a reason like that, people have to participate. You cannot sit on the sideline. I don't care how you feel about Joe Biden, you must vote for him because the consequences on the other side are too severe.
Yeah, because I'm going to wind up in jail. They're severe for you, buddy. I don't know if they're so severe for the country. I think the country's actually finding that the Trump administration is doing pretty well. We'll get to some of the poll numbers a little bit later in the show, but people are happy. You know why? Inflation's coming down. The market's back on a tear. Things are good. But Comey, for you, things are really S-H-I, you-know-what-E. Okay? They're really bad. And I wonder if your little plant there of their seashells had something to do with a distraction, because you knew that Kash Patel and Dan Bongino were reviewing the files associated with Crossfire Hurricane, which was your baby. And they're finding all kinds of corruption and all kinds of problems. But regardless of that, Tulsi wants you in jail for the seashells.
Do you believe Comey should be in jail?
I do. I'm very concerned for the president's life. We've already seen assassination attempts. I'm very concerned for his life. We, the American people, cannot take this lightly. Whatever your politics, we cannot allow people to get by without being held accountable for this kind of public call to assassinate the president of the United States. When we have 2 assassination attempts on the president's life, when we have people who look to guys like Comey, who've been celebrated by MSNBC and the Democrat elite and CNN as the beacon of integrity, the law and order guy, the guy who would tell the truth no matter what the consequences. This is the guy who's issuing a hit on President Trump, the president that the American people voted for. So it's guys like Comey and others who call the president the modern day Nazi, people who are in great positions of influence, who are saying that President Trump poses an existential threat to our country. These are people who hate democracy and hate the American people because they cannot stand that the people overwhelmingly chose to elect Donald Trump and send him back to the White House. So they are seeking other means to get their way and to try to remove him from that position.
Let's just say James Comey knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what 86 men, who doesn't know what 86 men? I mean, go back to my restaurant working days as a waitress, high school summers up in Kennebunkport, Maine. I was talking with one of the viewers just the other day about that in the chat, because they were like, oh, I used to work in Maine too. Well, that, we learned term 86, the baked lobster, pretty fast, right? When you were out, it was gone. Finito. It's also been known as sort of a mob phrase for you take them 8 miles out of town and you bury them 6 feet under. What kind of head of the FBI doesn't know that? That's a bunch of baloney. So you just have to question what his motive was. Is this sort of like AOC, like trying to tempt the administration into doing something so that they, I mean, be very cautious with this guy. He's bad news. He's always been bad news. And his intentions are not honorable, to Tulsi's point, trying to hold the FBI up on this, shining hill. No. This guy, bad dude. Bad one. And Dan Bongino knows it. Dan Bongino knows it, which is why he's saying they were weak, they were bad, they were terrible people. They really were. But I'll tell you something about Dan, because I've known him a long time. He's a really good guy. Like one of the best people in this industry that's on television or hosts a podcast or anything. Like just one of the most honorable, really straight shooters I've ever known in the business. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for him as a broadcaster and as a friend. And when Dan Bongino says what I'm about to show you, I realize, some people are like, wait, how can that be? But this is Dan. This is Dan talking. And he was asked by Maria about what went down in Butler, Pennsylvania, as well as the other assassination attempt on the president's life in Florida. And I want you to hear what he says, because he's not sugarcoating anything and he's not going to lead you down some primrose path. He's seen the files now, and here's his response.
Are we going to be surprised at what you learned?
You know what, Maria? Cash is not kidding. We've been personally briefed extensively on every single detail, nugget, tendril of this case. One is actively in court right now, so out of respect for the case, it's probably more appropriate that I stay quiet on that. However, I'm not going to tell people what they want to hear. I'm going to tell you the truth, and whether you like it or not is up to you. If there was a big explosive there, right? Given my history as a Secret Service agent, and my personal friendship, as a director does with the president, give me one logical, sensible reason we would not have. If you can think of one, there isn't. There in some of these cases, the there you're looking for is not there. And I know people, I get it, I understand. It's not there. If it was there, we would have told you.
So, I believe him. Okay, but I've known him for a long time, and I know how he thinks, and I know how honest a guy he is. And so he's saying he looked at those files and you got a couple of crackpots. Okay, in Butler, Pennsylvania, and then down in Florida, a couple of crackpots, and he doesn't think that there's a huge smoking gun. It's not like you can point to somebody deliberately doing this. The other thing that was really important was Dan and Cash also came out on Epstein. Now, this one actually surprised me, because I got to tell you, I got my own sources on this one, including Epstein's doctor, who spoke to him just a day before. But now, again, if Cash and Dan are correct in what they're about to say, I'll elaborate further on what may have been going down. But listen to their take on what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. And just remember, these guys have no incentive to kind of tell us something that's not actually true, right? Again, Dan, I know him. I'm telling you, he's not going to lie to you. Watch.
You said Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. People don't believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, they have a right to their opinion, but as someone who has worked as a public defender, as a prosecutor, who's been in that prison system, who's been in the Metropolitan Detention Center, who's been in segregated housing, you know a suicide when you see one, and that's what that was.
He killed himself. You want me to get, I've seen the whole file. He killed himself.
I know it's hard work.
So they have no reason to say that, right? Unless that's what they believe. And Dan's seen the file. Cash has seen the file, and that is what they believe. I've told you before, I spoke with the doctor who had talked to him within 24 hours before the episode happened. The doctor didn't actually believe that it was so succinct because he said, well, I talked to him and he seemed like in great spirits. So I don't really know how that happened after he seemed like he was in such good spirits. But one of the other things that the doctor did say to me was that he was just such an enormous personality, charming, loaded with all kinds of charm, would charm the heck out of anyone, anywhere. And you wonder how much Epstein may have been covering up for other things, right, with that charm. Again, it's hard for me to doubt Dan. I don't know Cash as well, but I've known Dan a lot of years, and he is salt of the earth. Some of you guys know Drew, who's produced on this show before, and Drew's very close, has been close with him for many, many years down in Florida. And again, you know, he'd say the same thing. Dan's not going to lie about something. So that's quite a statement coming from the two of them. But what's also worth remembering is that because these guys don't lie, and even though Dan may have thought this, that, and the other on his show, he's coming out and saying, look, I saw the files and this is the way it is. But he's also saying, I saw the files and this is the way it is when it comes to one James Comey and Russiagate. So there's some there on that. And that's an important thing to remember. And when you consider the timing of what James Comey was just trying to pull, I think that that is relevant. I think that that ties in with something here. Because James Comey was trying to distract, knowing that Crossfire Hurricane is coming out in, what did he tell us? A week or two. So we're going to be all over this. All over this, ladies and gentlemen. Listen, I've been covering this story a long time. And I was one of the few out there on Fox saying, this doesn't make any sense. Like my friend Maria, like Dan Bongino. And this is Dan even before he was at Fox. So we need to get to the bottom of that. Another interesting development that came out of this, we did hear Dan Bongino and Kash Patel slamming the northern border. We know as well they're actually going to be moving 1,500 agents out of the Hoover building in D.C., scattering them all over the country into the field. All those FBI agents are, wow, you're going to be kidding me. I got to leave D.C. Yeah, you're going to have to leave D.C. for a bit. They want to retrofit the building. Apparently there's like debris falling off the building. They have to have nets, etc. And so they deserve a better building. They want a better building. And in the meantime, these guys get out and see the rest of America, if you would. But let me go to this. Kash Patel talking about the northern border. We talk about the southern border so much, and there have been improvements made on the southern border. But how is it that fentanyl, this, that, and the other human trafficking is still happening? And he's pointing to Canada. And he's not saying it needs to be a 51st state or anything, but he is saying they got to clean up their act. They got to do their part. Why haven't they done it? Watch.
In the first 2-3 months that we've been in the seat under Donald Trump's administration, he has sealed the border. He has stopped border crossings. So where's all the fentanyl coming from still? Where's the trafficking coming from still? Where are all the narco traffickers going to keep bringing this stuff into the country? The northern border. Our adversaries have partnered up with the CCP and others, Russia, Iran, on a variety of different criminal enterprises, and they're going and they're sailing around to Vancouver and coming in by air. And the sheer tyranny of distance of the northern border and the lack of cooperation from federal authorities in prior administrations to actually firm up that northern border is what's causing a continuation of violent crime. Now, we're focused on it, and we're calling our state and local law enforcement partners up there. But you know who has to get to step in is Canada, because they're making it up there and shipping it down here. And I don't care about getting into this debate about making someone the 51st state or not, but they are our partner in the north. And say what you want about Mexico, but they helped us seal the southern border. The facts speak for themselves. The border that's open, I'll give you a statistic that I gave to Congress that nobody was paying attention to. Over 300 known or suspected terrorists crossed into this country last year illegally. Known or suspected terrorists, not illegals. Not just illegals, known or suspected terrorists. 85% of them came in through the northern border. Wow. This year, 100 known.
Wow. Known or suspected terrorists also came in. He went on to say through the northern border years ago, and I mean a lot of years ago, because, you know, my girls are now 15, and I want to think I was pregnant with them, and actually decided not to do the story at the time because it wasn't really, you know, one that I wanted to get involved with under the circumstances of being pregnant with twins. I was looking into a story of drugs being routed through China, through none other than the northern border of Canada, because there was a lot of evidence, and this was 15 years ago, that this was happening then. And it's only swelled in proportion because it's a huge business, right? Amazing too when you think about it. Remember the Opium Wars? China used to get so mad at us. Well, not us, but the Europeans. We had a little bit of involvement, but primarily it was the French and the German and the English, and they actually had a phenomenal opium trade going where they would actually buzz all this stuff up through the, interestingly, southern border in China. And despite pleas and calls from the Ming Dynasty, they'd say, no, we don't want this happening. It would continue to move up into China. And it is still a sore spot in China to these days, because over a third of the population became addicted to this stuff. And as a result, there were a whole bunch of concessions that had to be put in place, resulting out of the Opium Wars. So it's a funny way of history repeating itself. And believe me, China is well aware of this. We may not think about it much, but China does. And so if they can't come up through the bottom, I guess they're coming up through the top, right? Through the northern border. And Cash is saying that has to stop. You better believe it has to stop.